There's something I want to read to you and get your reaction to it. One of the people I interviewed on this show 3 years ago, so it was November of 2020, just after Thanksgiving, was Harry Samet. He's a retired special agent for the FBI. He arrested Zacarias Moussaoui, August of 2001. And Zacarias Moussaoui was labeled the 20th hijacker. You know, this is just 3-4 weeks before 9/11 happens. But Harry and I were talking about the future of counterterrorism. And this is one of the things that he said. Having sat with a few white supremacists and a whole lot of Islamic extremists, it doesn't matter what their ethnic background or their racial background or even what their grievance is. It crosses racial ethnic lines. When a person has a grievance, it's hard for the layperson to understand that this becomes their everything. And this idea, you know, for a lot of us who are not on the extremes, we don't understand this idea of everything. And so I think about extremists on the left, I think about extremists on the right, and their identity being so wrapped up in whatever grievance it is, whether it's, you know, political, whether it's a gang or, you know, whatever. How do we bring these folks who have these deep-seated grievances back to our families or back to the middle or back to our communities? What ideas do you have there?
It reminds me a lot of, just to bring it full circle, to the work that Curtis Toller does now at Chicago CRED, which is a violence interruption program in Chicago that has been really out front in trying to think creatively and holistically about how to invite people out of high conflict, right? And typically, you know, I actually, one of the highlights of my career was having Curtis speak to a group of congressional staffers about how you would apply the gang violence interruption model to politics, right? Because the behavior is really similar. And he said that typically what you want to do is you want to invite people, even extremists, you want to invite people to do the conflict differently, to agree together to some basic ground rules. You know, like not saying we're going to give up our fight, but we are saying we're not gonna, you know, shoot anyone in this part of the city, right? Or we're going to condemn violence from our side when it happens, or whatever. And I said to him, well, why would you invite the extremists to that party, right? Like they're never going to come. And he said, well, this is the challenge we always face. And you don't typically start with the biggest conflict entrepreneurs, but you want to issue the invitation. And you slowly bring more and more people, politicians in this case, to the table. And then if the extremist knows that this is happening and you keep inviting him maybe 100 times, right? And one day something's going to happen where this extremist is going to hit his saturation point, right? Where he starts to question the conflict and to want a way out. If only he could find a way. Curtis says 85% of people in gang conflict want a way out. They would leave the conflict if they thought they could get out because it's miserable. It's miserable. And it's miserable for a lot of politicians, most politicians, right? It is miserable. And you're afraid for your family's safety. You're afraid for your safety. It is not a good way to live. So usually the way that he persuades people to come to the table who are quite radicalized and violent is through their kids, is to say, hey, do you want your kids to continue this cycle? And the answer is almost always no. You know, so eventually, if you issue that invitation and give people a place to go, right, that can be really disruptive to the conflict. But, you know, just continuing to fight in the same way and to do what they did, but only louder, doesn't give people a place to go. So it's really difficult work, right, to offer that path out of conflict, whether it's to, you know, neo-Nazis or Islamic terrorists. It's the last thing you want to do, right? Your instinct is quite the opposite. But what I found is that in high conflict, your intuition does not serve you, that you really have to do counterintuitive things or you'll just end up mimicking the behavior of your oppressors.